On a quiet afternoon in Montana, a dusty car pulls up to Paradise Creek Farm. Behind the wheel sits Claire Montgomery. Though she doesn't tell anyone, her last name would be recognized worldwide. She's running from a life of wealth and fake smiles, searching for something real. When farmer Jack Harrison steps out of his barn, he sees just another lost traveler who needs to use a phone. He has no idea this simple act of kindness will change everything. This is a story about two people from different worlds, finding out that sometimes the heart knows better than the bank account. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn breaks over Paradise Creek Farm in thin golden threads, finding Jack Harrison exactly where it always does, on his front porch, nursing a cup of black coffee. His weathered hands reach into his pocket, pulling out his grandfather's silver pocket watch. 5:32, right on schedule. The watch hasn't needed setting in 40 years. Like the sun itself, his grandfather used to say, keeps perfect time. Jack can still hear the old man's voice, still feel the weight of the day he inherited. Both watch and farm, time and land, son, the only true measures of a life well lived. The coffee's bitter warmth grounds him as his eyes scan the property. 300 acres of Montana soil that sustained 3 generations of Harrisons. The morning light catches on the dew-heavy grass, transforms the aging red barn into something almost majestic. Even the sagging fence line has dignity in this light, though it's another item on his endless repair list. Inside his pocket, the watch ticks steadily. 5:35. Time to start the day proper. The barn door groans its familiar greeting as Jack steps inside. Martha, his oldest mare, nickered softly from her stall. "Morning to you too, old girl." He starts his rounds, feeding the horses, checking on the pregnant heifer in the back stall, mentally calculating how much longer the feed supply will last. Sarah, his daughter, keeps telling him to computerize everything, track it all on spreadsheets. "It's 2024, Dad. You can't keep running things like it's 1960. But Jack knows every animal's needs by heart, can tell you exactly how many bales are left in the loft without counting. Some things technology can't improve on. The morning passes in its familiar rhythm. Check the irrigation lines in the east field. Repair a section of fence the winter storms damaged. Quick trip into town for supplies, where Miss Eleanor at the general store asks about his daughter and reminds him the Harvest Festival Committee meets next week. "We need you there, Jack," she says, ringing up his supplies. "Town's changing. People forget what matters. Festival reminds them where they came from." He nods, knowing she's right. 3 new housing developments have sprung up in the valley this year alone. City folks buying up farmland, building vacation homes. Each sale feels like a small betrayal of everything his grandfather stood for. Back at the farm, Jack parks his truck and pulls out the pocket watch again. 11:47. His grandfather's voice echoes, "Time waits for no man, but it'll always tell you true." The watch's silver case bears the scratches and dings of 3 generations, but the face remains clear, the hands steady in their eternal circle. The afternoon brings more repairs. This time the old tractor that's more rust than paint now. Parts cost more each year, and the bank account doesn't stretch like it used to. Last month's property tax notice sits heavy in his desk drawer, along with the letter from Midwest Agricultural Corporation offering to buy him out. Jack wipes his hands on a rag, leaving streaks of grease. The corporate letter had called it an opportunity for transition, as if 3 generations of blood, sweat and dreams could be reduced to a number on a check. His grandfather's watch ticks in his pocket, marking time on a way of life that the world seems determined to leave behind. But there's dignity in the struggle, in keeping faith with the land and the legacy it represents. The watch chimes 4 o'clock, time to start evening chores. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but for now there's comfort in the routine, in the knowledge that some things remain constant in an ever-changing world. As the sun begins its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Jack stands at his fence line, The pocket watch rests in his palm, its steady heartbeat a reminder of all that was, all that remains, and all that might yet be. In the distance, a car he doesn't recognize turns onto his road, kicking up dust in the fading light. The watch reads 6:15. Time, as always, moves forward, and sometimes, though Jack doesn't know it yet, it brings unexpected changes with it. Claire Montgomery deliberately missed the turn for the third time, watching her GPS recalculate with grim satisfaction. Her latest model smartphone lay hidden in the glove compartment of her carefully chosen car, a 5-year-old Toyota Camry, with just enough dust to look authentic. The sleek device held hundreds of missed calls, emails, and messages from the board members who were probably having collective aneurysms over her disappearance. Take the next right to return to route. The rental car's built-in navigation system chirped. Claire turned left instead. The Montana landscape stretched out before her, vast and indifferent to who she was or what she was worth. No one here cared that she'd turned Montgomery Tech into a $12 billion company. The mountains didn't know about the impending merger she'd fled from, or the carefully orchestrated marriage her mother was arranging with the CEO of their biggest competitor. A weathered wooden sign caught her eye. Paradise Creek Farm, Esther, 1924. The name itself felt like an invitation. Claire slowed the car, taking in the faded red barn, the well-worn pickup truck, the fields that stretched toward distant mountains. It looked like something from a painting, the kind of place where people lived real lives, unmarred by corporate politics and shareholder expectations. She reached for her hidden phone, then stopped herself. That device was a tether to everything. She was trying to escape. Instead, she pulled into the gravel driveway, letting the car drift to a stop. A man emerged from the barn, tall, solidly built, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years working under open skies. Claire stepped out of the car, adjusting her deliberately casual outfit. Jeans, a simple blouse, boots she'd bought, specifically for this escape. The man approached, his walk unhurried but purposeful. Everything about him radiated a quiet authenticity that made her heart ache with its contrast to the world she'd left behind. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice carrying that particular mix of caution and courtesy that seemed unique to rural America. "I hope so," Claire said, letting genuine uncertainty color her voice. "My phone's dead, and I seem to have taken a wrong turn somewhere. Would it be possible to borrow yours? I promise it'll be a quick call." He studied her for a moment, and Claire felt a flash of panic. Had she overdone it? Did something about her still scream billionaire tech CEO despite her careful preparations? But then he nodded, reaching into his pocket for an ancient flip phone that made her want to smile. It was perfect. Exactly the kind of phone that wouldn't raise any questions about why she couldn't just use her own. "Reception's better up by the house," he said, gesturing toward the farmhouse. "I'm Jack Harrison." "Claire," she replied, deliberately omitting her last name. "Thank you, I really appreciate this." As they walked toward the house, Claire took in more details. The careful repairs visible everywhere, the efficient layout of the buildings, the subtle signs of financial strain that her business-trained eye couldn't help but notice. This was a place maintained with pride and determination, even as modern economic realities pressed in from all sides. The screen door creaked as Jack held it open for her. Inside, the house was clean and modest, with furniture that had clearly served multiple generations. A silver pocket watch lay on the kitchen table, its case bearing the patina of years of handling. "Would you like some water?" Jack asked, his instinctive hospitality evident. "It's a hot day to be lost on back roads," Claire accepted, watching. As he filled a glass from the tap, here was a man who'd probably never had to calculate the optics of his every move, never had to wonder if someone was being nice to him because of his net worth. The simplicity of the gesture made her throat tight. "The phone," he said, holding out the flip phone. "Like I said, reception's better in here. You can sit at the table if you'd like." Claire took the phone, her fingers brushing his for a moment. The brief contact sent an unexpected shiver through her, a sensation that had nothing to do with her carefully constructed plan and everything to do with the genuine warmth in his eyes. She sat at the kitchen table, the pocket watch ticking, quietly beside her, and stared at the phone's tiny screen. In theory, this was where she'd make a show of calling for help. Instead, she found herself looking up at Jack Harrison, seeing the quiet strength in his bearing, the gentle concern in his expression, and made a split-second decision to veer from her script. "Actually," she said, "I think I might be more lost than I realized." Jack opened the old ledger on his desk, its pages worn soft with years of daily entries. Numbers marched across the lined paper in his careful handwriting: feed costs, equipment repairs, crop yields. Claire leaned in beside him, and he caught a faint scent of something floral that seemed strangely at home in his dusty office. "You keep all your records by hand?" she asked, no judgment in her voice, just curiosity. "Call me old-fashioned," he said, running a finger down a column of figures. "My daughter Sarah's always trying to get me to switch to computers, but this system hasn't failed me yet." Claire studied the neat rows of numbers. "Mind if I take a closer look?" Something in her tone, professional, analytical, made him glance at her. She bent over the ledger with the focused attention of someone who knew what they were looking for, not the usual tourist interest he sometimes got from city folks who thought farming was all romantic sunsets and cute animals. "These feed costs," she said, tapping a recent entry. "They've increased by almost 40% since last year." Jack nodded, impressed despite himself. "Good eye, global grain prices, drought in the Midwest didn't help. But your revenue from the Southfield corn crop hasn't increased proportionally." She flipped back a few pages, comparing numbers. "Have you considered rotating in soybeans? The market's stronger and they're less water-intensive." Now Jack was definitely staring. "You know farming?" A shadow passed over her face, quick as a cloud on a sunny day. "I know business, numbers, patterns." She straightened up, as if catching herself. "Would you show me the rest of the farm?" Jack led her out, past the storage sheds and equipment barn. The afternoon sun had softened, casting long shadows across the fields. He found himself pointing out things he rarely articulated. The way the soil changed texture between the north and south fields, how the creek's flow patterns affected irrigation timing. "This field here," he said, stopping at the east boundary, "was the first piece my grandfather worked. Started with just 40 acres in 1924, added the rest bit by bit over 30 years. Claire walked a few steps into the field, crouching to run her fingers through the soil. "Rich earth," she said. "You can feel the years of care." "Soil's got memory," Jack agreed. "Every choice you make, good or bad, shows up eventually. No shortcuts in farming. Unlike some businesses," Claire murmured so quietly he almost missed it. Before he could ask what she meant, she pointed to the distant tree line. "Is that where the creek starts?" They walked the creek line as Jack explained the property's water rights, irrigation systems, and the challenges of maintaining them. Claire asked surprisingly technical questions about water management and seasonal planning. Each answer seemed to spark 2 more questions, all of them thoughtful, focused on practical details. "Most visitors just want to pet the horses and take pictures of the sunset," Jack said, as they headed back toward the barn. Claire smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "I'm not most visitors." Inside the barn, Jack showed her the ancient tractor he'd been wrestling with earlier. "Parts are getting harder to find. Manufacturers stopped making them 15 years ago." "Have you checked online marketplaces?" Claire asked. Then quickly added, "Or so I've heard from other farmers." Jack patted the tractor's rusted hood. "Some things you can't fix with just parts. This old girl's telling me it might be time to let go." "Sometimes," Claire said carefully, "letting go of one thing means making room for something better." She met his eyes. "Though I suppose that depends on how you measure better." The evening light slanted through the barn's high windows, catching dust motes in golden beams. Jack found himself studying this strange woman who talked about business strategies one minute and understood soil memory the next. "Sun's getting low," he said finally. "Your phone call, did you need to try again?" Claire looked toward her car, then back at the farm. Something flickered in her expression. Longing, maybe, or recognition. "Actually, would it be okay if I stayed a little longer? I'd love to learn more about how you manage everything." Jack thought about the ledger, the rising costs, the bank notices, about how long it had been since someone showed real interest in understanding his world, not just looking at it like a postcard. "I suppose I could use a fresh perspective," he said. "You seem to have a good head for numbers." "Numbers are just the beginning," Claire said softly. "It's what they represent that matters." The old pocket watch ticked steadily in Jack's pocket. As they walked back to the house, the shadow of the barn stretching long across the yard behind them. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark called out its evening song, a sweet, clear note in the gathering dusk. The kitchen filled with warmth as Jack pulled his mother's cookbook from the shelf, its spine cracked and pages yellow with age. Flour dusted his hands as he opened it to a dog-eared page marked "Margaret's Chicken and Dumplings." "My mother swore the secret was in the timing," he said, laying the book gently on the counter. "Too fast, and the dumplings are heavy. Too slow, and they fall apart." Claire stood beside him, sleeves rolled up, reading the handwritten notes in the margins. Different inks, different handwriting, generations of small adjustments and loving. Annotations. Her fingers traced the faded pencil marks, something soft in her expression. "My mother never cooked," she said quietly, then seemed to catch herself. "I mean, she was always too busy with other things." Jack measured flour into a bowl, the movements automatic after years of practice. "Mom taught me everything she knew about cooking. Said a farmer needs to know how to feed himself proper." He smiled at the memory. "Though I suspect she just wanted company in the kitchen." Together they fell into an easy rhythm. Claire proved surprisingly capable with a knife, her vegetable cuts precise and efficient. When Jack raised an eyebrow, she shrugged. "I took a cooking class once, trying to find something real, I guess." The cookbook lay open between them, its pages containing more than just recipes. Here was his grandmother's note about adding extra carrots in winter, his mother's reminder about stirring clockwise for luck. Each entry told a story of family, of meals shared and lessons passed down. "This spot here," Jack pointed to a small stain on the corner, "that's where I spilled vanilla when I was 10. Mum was teaching me to make her special Christmas cookies," he chuckled. "She said it added character to the page." Claire's hands stilled over the cutting board. "It must be nice," she said softly, "having all these memories, these connections to your past." "Sometimes memories are heavy things too," Jack replied, thinking of quiet dinners after his wife passed, of teaching himself to cook for one. "But they remind us where we come from." As the chicken simmered, filling the kitchen with savory aromas, they worked side by side. Jack showed Claire how to mix and drop the dumplings, her attempts growing more confident with each try. Their hands brushed occasionally, sending small currents of awareness through the comfortable quiet. "Tell me about your mother's Christmas cookies," Claire said as they waited for the dumplings to cook. She'd settled into one of the old kitchen chairs, looking surprisingly at home. Jack sat across from her, the familiar weight of his pocket, a watch a comfort. She'd start baking right after Thanksgiving. The whole house would smell like vanilla and cinnamon for weeks. As he talked, sharing stories of holiday traditions and family gatherings, he noticed how intently Claire listened. Not the polite attention of someone making conversation, but the hungry focus of someone storing away every detail, as if trying to absorb the experience of family through his memories. The pocket watch chimed 8 o'clock as they finally sat and down to eat. Steam rose from the bowls, carrying the scent of herbs and childhood memories. Claire took her first bite and closed her eyes, a small sound of appreciation escaping her. I've never had anything quite like this." "Simple food," Jack said, "but honest. Maybe that's what makes it special." Claire opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. Everything here feels honest. The words seemed to hang between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Jack watched as something flickered across Claire's face. Regret? Longing? But before he could decipher it, she smiled and asked about the cookie recipe again. They talked through dinner, sharing stories and comfortable silences. Claire told him about learning to cook from YouTube videos in her apartment, though she was vague about where this apartment was. Jack described teaching Sarah to make these same dumplings, how she'd insisted on adding her own notes to the cookbook's margins when she was 12. As they cleaned up afterward, working in easy synchronization, Jack found himself studying Claire's profile in the soft kitchen light. There was something both familiar and mysterious about her, like a well-known song played in a different key. "Thank you," she said as they finished, drying her hands on a dish towel, "not just for dinner, but for sharing your family's stories." "Sometimes sharing a meal is the best way to know someone," Jack replied. The cookbook sat on the counter between them, its pages holding decades of family history. "Would you like to see my mother's Christmas cookie recipe?" Claire's smile held a touch of sadness. "I'd like that very much." Dusk had settled into full darkness by the time they stepped outside. Claire's hand brushed against her car keys, the weight of her deception suddenly heavy. In her glove compartment, hidden beneath maps and receipts carefully chosen to support her cover story, today's business newspaper lay folded. Her own face stared out from the front page. Montgomery Tech CEO's mysterious disappearance raises questions. "I should get going," she said, even as her heart rebelled against leaving this pocket of authenticity. "Thank you again for everything." Jack walked with her to the car, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Roads can be tricky at night. You sure you don't want to wait till morning?" Claire turned the key in the ignition. The engine made a sound she'd carefully learned to replicate, the specific cough of a failing starter. She tried again, letting genuine frustration color her voice. "No, no, no! Not now!" Jack leaned in, his presence solid and reassuring. "Try once more?" She did, producing the same result. The guilt of her deception warred with the desperate desire to stay in this world a little longer. Just one more day of being simply Claire, of conversations uncolored by her wealth and position. "Pop the hood," Jack said. "Let me take a look." Claire's heart skipped. She knew enough about cars to discuss the problem, had studied specifically for this moment. But Jack's hands were those of someone who'd worked on engines his whole life. Would he see through her staged breakdown? The hood creaked open, and Jack bent over the engine. His flashlight beam moved methodically, professionally. Claire held her breath, but his examination was interrupted by the first fat drops of rain. "Storm's coming in," he said, straightening up. "Look, I've got a guest room. No sense trying to fix this in the dark and rain. We can take a better look in the morning." Thunder rumbled in the distance as they retrieved her overnight bag from the trunk, another prop, carefully packed with deliberately ordinary clothes. The rain began in earnest as they reached the house, drumming on the tin roof. Jack showed her to a small, neat room that smelled of lavender and clean linens. "Bathrooms down the hall. There should be fresh towels under the sink." "Thank you," Claire said, meaning it despite her subterfuge. "I really appreciate this." Alone in the room, she sat on the edge of the bed listening to the rain and Jack's footsteps moving down the hall. The guest room was like everything else in the house. Simple, well-maintained, honest. Family photos lined the walls. A young Jack with his parents in front of the barn. Jack and a pretty woman holding a baby, his wife and Sarah, she assumed. The images tracked time's passage, faces aging, the child growing, and then the wife's absence in later photos. Claire changed into sleep clothes, then crept to her car to retrieve her hidden phone, needing to check for urgent messages. The screen, lit up with hundreds of notifications. Stock prices, board member inquiries, her mother's increasingly frantic texts. The merger announcement was scheduled for next week. The arranged introduction to the competitor's CEO was set for Thursday. A floorboard creaked behind her as she stood in the dark hallway, and Claire quickly shoved the phone into her pocket. Jack appeared with an extra blanket. "Night air gets cold here," he said, then noticed her stance. "Everything okay?" "Just restless," she said. "Getting used to a new place." He nodded, understanding. "Farm's quiet compared to the city. Some folks find it too quiet." "No," Claire said quickly. "It's perfect, it's just—" She struggled to find words that were true despite her lies. "Sometimes quiet makes you hear your own thoughts too clearly." Something in Jack's expression softened. "I know what you mean. After Linda, my wife, passed, the quiet was the hardest part." He held out the blanket. "But sometimes quiet is what we need to figure things out." Their fingers met on the blanket's soft fabric. For a moment, neither let go. In the darkness, with rain drumming overhead, Claire could almost believe she was just a lost traveler, that the world of board meetings and billion-dollar decisions was the illusion. A buzz from her hidden phone shattered the moment. Jack's eyes flickered to her pocket, where the faint glow of the screen was visible through her clothes. "Thought your phone was dead," he said quietly. Claire's heart stopped. But a loud crack of thunder saved her from responding. The lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness, broken only by the faint blue glow from her pocket. "Stay here," Jack said, his voice professional again. "I'll get some candles." Left alone in the dark hallway, Claire leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. The phone buzzed again in her pocket, insistent as conscience. Morning arrived with the kind of clarity that follows a storm. Claire found Jack in the barn, already working on the broken tractor. He looked up as she entered, his expression carefully neutral. "About last night," she began. "Old tractors are like old secrets," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Both tend to come out eventually." He gestured to the machine. "Want to help?" Claire recognized the offer for what it was, a chance to prove herself through actions rather than words. She rolled up her sleeves. "Tell me what you need." Jack's eyebrows rose slightly at her willingness, but he moved aside to make room. "Hold this light. I need to check the timing belt." They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by Jack's occasional instructions. Claire surprised herself by actually enjoying the work. The logical progression of mechanical problems, the satisfaction of understanding how things fit together, so different from the abstract numbers and projections that filled her daily life. "Hand me that wrench," Jack asked. As she passed it, their fingers touched, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Engine grease smudged both their hands, making them equally dirty, equally real. "You're good at this," Jack said after watching her correctly identify a worn gasket. "For someone who's just passing through," Claire focused on the engine, avoiding his eyes. "I like understanding how things work. The real things, I mean, not just—" She stopped herself before saying stock prices and market projections. Loud clang interrupted them as something dropped deeper in the engine. Jack reached in instinctively, then hissed in pain as his arm caught on a sharp edge. "Let me see," Claire said, taking his arm before he could protest. A thin line of blood welled up along his forearm. Without thinking, she pulled her clean. Handkerchief from her pocket. Real silk, she realized too late, and wrapped it around the cut. Their faces were close, her hand still holding his arm. Jack looked at the delicate fabric, now stained with his blood and engine grease. "That's too fine for farm work." "It's just a handkerchief," Claire said softly, though they both knew it wasn't. Her fingers moved gently over his skin, feeling the strength in his arm, the calluses earned through years of honest work. "Claire." His voice was low, questioning. She looked up, meeting his eyes. The morning light through the barn windows caught the silver in his hair, the lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and worry. A loud moo from the pregnant heifer broke the moment. Claire stepped back, her hands falling away from his arm, but something had shifted between them, as tangible as the sunlight streaming through the barn dust. They returned to work, but now every movement felt charged with awareness. Their hands brushed, exchanging tools, their shoulders touched, leaning over the engine. Each contact sent small shivers of electricity through Claire's body. By midday, they'd made real progress on the tractor. Claire felt a surprising pride in their achievement, in the honest sweat and effort it represented. She watched Jack test the engine, his movements sure and practiced. "Well," he said, as the engine turned over smoothly, "seems like we make a good team." The words hit Claire like a physical blow. A good team. If only he knew how well they could really work together, her business acumen combined with his practical knowledge. She could help him modernize the farm, make it profitable again, but that would mean revealing everything, explaining the lies, the hidden phone, the silk handkerchief now ruined with honest dirt and blood. How could she maintain his trust? After that, the tractor hummed between them, running better than it had in years. Jack's hand still bore her handkerchief like a flag of truce between their worlds. From the barnyard came the sound of real life. Animals, wind, the distant call of a meadowlark. "Thank you," Jack said finally, "for helping." The words seemed to carry more weight than the simple task warranted. Claire looked at her grease-stained hands, so far from their usual manicured perfection. "Thank you for teaching me." She felt. His eyes on her knew he caught the deeper meaning in her words. The morning's work had taught her more than mechanics. It had shown her what it meant to create value with your own hands, to solve problems in the real world rather than through screens and spreadsheets. A truck's engine sounded from the driveway. Through the barn door, Claire saw an older woman climbing out, carrying what looked like a pie. The local gossip network had clearly noticed her presence. "Mrs. Peterson," Jack said, a warning in his tone. "She brings baked goods when she wants to know something." Claire smiled despite her anxiety. "And what does she want to know?" Who the mysterious city woman is that Jack Harrison's letting stay at his farm. His eyes held hers. "Can't blame her for wondering. I've been wondering myself." Before Claire could respond, Mrs. Peterson's voice rang out across the yard. "Jack Harrison, don't tell me you've got this young lady working on farm equipment." Claire looked down at her dirty clothes, her ruined silk handkerchief tied around Jack's arm, and felt an unexpected laugh bubble up. The absurdity of her situation, a billionaire CEO spending the morning fixing tractors, struck her full force. But when she looked back at Jack, she saw no laughter in his eyes, only questions, patience, and something else that made her heart beat faster than any board meeting ever had. Sarah Harrison arrived like an incoming storm front, her sleek hybrid car a stark contrast to the farm's weathered vehicles. She stepped out in crisp business casual, tablet in hand, looking every inch the agricultural business consultant she'd become. Her father's watch, a modern smartwatch rather than his grandfather's silver timepiece, glinted on her wrist. "Dad," she called, then stopped short at the sight of Claire helping Jack stack hay bales. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." Jack straightened up, brushing hay from his shirt. "Sarah wasn't expecting you till next week." "Clearly." Sarah's eyes swept over Claire's work clothes. Designer jeans now properly dirty from real farm work. "I had some concerns about the latest property assessment. Thought we should discuss it." Claire recognized the protective edge in Sarah's voice. She'd used the same tone in countless boardrooms, marking territory, asserting authority. "I'm Claire," she offered, extending a hand before realizing it was still dirty from work. Sarah shook it anyway, her grip professional, assessing. "Sarah Harrison. I handle the farm's business affairs." She turned to her father. "Can we talk privately?" Jack nodded, shooting Claire an apologetic look. "Why don't you finish up here?" "I'll be back in a bit." Claire watched them head toward the house, Sarah already pulling up spreadsheets on her tablet. Through the kitchen window, she could see them in serious discussion, Sarah pointing at figures, while Jack ran a tired hand through his hair. The familiar sight of financial stress made Claire's fingers itch for her hidden phone. She could solve their problems with a single call. Montgomery Tech's agricultural division had developed software that could revolutionize small farm operations. She could. "You're not who you say you are." Sarah's voice cut through her thoughts. Claire turned to find Jack's daughter watching her from the barn doorway, arms crossed. "I'm just someone passing through," Claire said carefully. "Really? Because passing through doesn't usually involve knowing advanced irrigation techniques or understanding complex profit margins." Sarah pulled out her phone, tapped the screen. And most lost travelers don't wear $700 work boots. Claire glanced down at her carefully chosen casual boots. She'd thought they were subtle enough. I did some research, Sarah continued. Your car, rental agreements under a shell company, and that silk handkerchief you used on Dad's arm? It's from a limited collection that sold out to private clients months ago. Each word hit like a hammer stroke. Claire had prepared for many contingencies, but she hadn't counted on a farmer's daughter being quite so thorough. Whatever you're after, Sarah said quietly, my father's not some project or investment opportunity. This farm, this life, it's real. It matters. I know it does. The words came out before Claire could stop them, heavy with truth. Do you? Sarah stepped closer. Because I've spent years watching people try to buy pieces of this valley, turning working farms into vacation properties or corporate retreats. Each time they talk about preservation and heritage. Each time something real gets lost. Through the window, they could see Jack checking his grandfather's watch, his expression troubled as he studied whatever numbers Sarah had shown him. I'm not here to buy anything, Claire said softly. No? Sarah's laugh was bitter. Then why are your company's acquisition specialists researching property values in this area? Claire's head snapped up. What? Sarah held up her phone, showing a business news article. Claire's heart stopped. There, under a photo of Montgomery Tech's headquarters, was the headline, Agricultural Division Eyes Montana Expansion. I don't... Claire started, but Sarah cut her off. Save it. I don't know exactly who you are or what game you're playing, but I know this. If you hurt my father, if you're using him to get to this land... She let the threat hang unfinished. Jack's voice called from the house. Sarah, Claire, come on in. Got coffee ready. They stared at each other for a long moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Sarah turned toward the house. Coming, Dad, she called, her voice perfectly pleasant. At the door, she paused. Just remember, some things money can't buy, and some betrayals can't be fixed with a checkbook. She left Claire standing in the barn, surrounded by the honest smell of hay and leather, feeling the walls of her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. Through the window, she watched Jack pour coffee into his mother's old cups, his movements as natural and true as everything else about him. The watch on his belt caught the sunlight, ticking away precious seconds of a dream she suddenly realized she didn't want to wake from. The old barn photos covered an entire wall of Jack's office, a visual timeline of Paradise Creek Farm's history. Claire stood before them, studying the changes across decades. The barn in the earliest photo, dated 1924, stood proud and new. Each subsequent image told a story. A lean year when repairs were minimal, a good year when they added the west wing, the gradual weathering of wood and wisdom. Your grandfather had vision, she said, as Jack sorted through bills at his desk. Starting with just 40 acres, building it into all this. Different times, Jack replied, his voice tight with the stress of mounting paperwork. Different challenges. Claire turned from the photos. The challenges now aren't insurmountable. Have you considered diversifying? The South Field has perfect exposure for solar panels. You could generate income while still growing crops underneath. Jack's pen stopped moving. Solar panels, agrivoltaics. It's a proven system. The panels provide shade, reduce water evaporation, and the lease payments from the energy company could offset... Offset what? Jack stood, his voice sharp. The sight of industrial equipment on land my grandfather worked by hand. The knowledge that I couldn't make it work on my own. That's not what I meant. Claire stepped closer to his desk. I'm talking about adapting, about finding new ways to keep the farm viable. Like Sarah's spreadsheets, her suggestions to sell off the north parcel for capital injection. He gestured to the photos. Every acre here means something. Every fence post has a story. Stories don't pay property taxes, Claire said softly, then immediately regretted it at the flash of hurt in his eyes. No, he said, they don't. But they're worth something all the same. He picked up an old photo of his grandfather standing proudly beside the barn. "You see limitations, problems to solve. I see legacy." "Why can't it be both?" Claire moved around the desk, close enough now to see the details in the photo. The weathered face of Jack's grandfather, the set of his shoulders that matched his grandson's. Honoring the past doesn't mean refusing to embrace the future. Easy to say when you're just passing through. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. When none of this really belongs to you. Claire flinched as if struck. Everything she wanted to say about belonging, about feeling more real here than she had in years, stuck in her throat, tangled with secrets and lies. "I may be just passing through," she said finally, "but I care about what happens here, to the farm, to—" She couldn't finish. Jack set the photo down carefully. "Why?" Such a simple question, such an impossible answer. "Because places like this matter," she said. "Because the world needs more than just efficiency and profit margins. It needs," she gestured to the wall of photos, to the history they represented. "It needs roots, memory, but it also needs to survive. And you think you know how to make that happen?" There was something else in his voice now. Not just anger, but curiosity, challenge. Claire took a deep breath. "I think I understand both worlds. The one you're trying to preserve and the one pressing in from outside. They don't have to be enemies." Jack studied her face for a long moment. Outside, a tractor rumbled past. Sarah, checking the irrigation. Lines with the new monitoring system she'd insisted on installing. Old and new, working together whether Jack liked it or not. "Show me," he said finally. "What?" "Show me how these solar panels would work, where they'd go, what it would really mean for the farm." He tapped the photo of his grandfather. "Help me see what you see." Claire's heart raced. This was her chance to help, to make a real difference. But explaining her vision would mean revealing how much she really knew about agricultural technology, about business planning, about— "I'd need some time," she said, "to research, to get the details right." Jack nodded slowly. "Time," he smiled. But it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Funny how that works. The longer you stay, the more questions I have, Jack. But also," he continued, his voice softening, "the less I care about the answers." The admission hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing. Through the window, they could see Sarah walking back from the fields, tablet in hand, the past and future colliding in every step. Claire looked at the wall of photos one more time, decades of history watching her with paper eyes. Something had to give. She just prayed it wouldn't be Jack's trust when it did. The bank letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, the crisp white envelope standing out among the usual bills and catalogues. Claire watched from the kitchen window as Jack read it at the mailbox, his shoulders stiffening with each line. When he finally looked up, the weight of generations seemed to press down on him. That night, after Jack went to bed, Claire retrieved her hidden phone from the false bottom of her suitcase. The screen cast a blue glow across her face as she logged into her secure email. 3 swipes, 2 passwords, and she was in her private account. "Research only," she whispered to herself, fingers hovering over the keys, just gathering information. But an hour later, she had done more than research. Using a series of shell companies, techniques perfected during years of corporate acquisitions, she'd arranged for an anonymous offer to be made on the neighboring Miller property. The land had been driving down local prices, its neglected state affecting all nearby assessments, including Paradise Creek Farm. The next morning, Jack brought in the local paper, his coffee forgotten, as he read the headline, "Mystery buyer shows interest in troubled Miller farm." Claire pretended to focus on her breakfast while he read. "It says here they're planning to restore it," Jack said. "Keep it as working farmland." His voice held cautious hope. That could help with the bank's concerns about area depreciation. Claire hummed non-committally, guilt warring with satisfaction. The restoration plans were real. She'd spent half the night designing them, drawing on Montgomery Tech's agricultural division research. Strange timing, Jack continued, studying the article. Right when we need it most. Sometimes luck turns, Claire offered, not meeting his eyes. Jack folded the paper, his grandfather's watch ticking steadily in his pocket. Luck, huh? He picked up a second envelope that had arrived, identical to the bank letter, but addressed to neighboring farms. Miller's place wasn't the only one. Getting pressure to sell. Claire's hands stilled on her coffee cup. Oh, whole valleys being squeezed. Some corporate group's been buying up water rights, making offers through different companies. He looked directly at her. All seems very carefully planned. The accusation in his tone was subtle but clear. Claire forced herself to hold his gaze, years of boardroom negotiations keeping her expression neutral. Large companies often diversify their investments. True, Jack stood, gathering his work gloves. Sarah's looking into who's behind it all. She's good at following paper trails. The warning shot landed. Claire waited until she heard his truck start before pulling out her phone again. She'd been careful with the Miller purchase, but if Sarah dug deep enough, a new email caught her eye. The bank had already adjusted their assessment of Paradise Creek Farm based on the Miller property news. The immediate pressure was off, but she'd only bought them time. Through the window, she watched Jack checking fence lines in the distance. He moved with the certainty of a man who knew every inch of his land, who could read the story of soil and seasons in each step. How could she make him understand that she wasn't trying to change that story, just help write its next chapter? The morning sun caught the silver case of his grandfather's watch as he worked. Its face turned always toward home. Claire looked down at her phone, its screen reflecting corporate logos and stock prices, and felt the distance between their worlds like a physical ache. She had the power to save this farm with a single phone call, but doing so would mean losing something far more precious than money could ever buy: Jack's trust, his respect, the way he looked at her like she was just Claire, a woman who understood the value of things that couldn't be bought or sold. The bank letter lay open on the table, its threats masked in polite corporate language she could read all too well. Beside it, Jack had left his coffee cup, the rim bearing a chip that told its own story of years and comfort and home. Claire picked up her phone one more time, fingers moving swiftly. One last failsafe, she told herself. One more shield between Paradise Creek Farm and the forces gathering against it. She'd protect this place, these people, even if they never knew, even if it meant they might hate her when they found out who she really was. Outside, Jack's truck. Engine started again. Claire slipped the phone away and picked up his coffee cup, running her thumb across the familiar chip. Some things were worth more than money. She just prayed she hadn't already paid too high a price for learning that truth. The farmers' market filled the town square with a patchwork of canopies and folding tables, each booth a testament to the valley's resilience. Jack's produce display drew admiring looks. His heirloom tomatoes arranged in perfect pyramids, herbs bundled with twine, each vegetable wearing the proud dirt of Paradise Creek Farm. "You've got an eye for presentation," Claire said, adjusting a basket of bell peppers. The morning light caught Jack's smile, softer than usual. "Mom always said people eat with their eyes first." He checked his grandfather's watch. Early crowd should be coming soon. The local newspaper sat folded on their table. Its headline, visible: Miller Farm Restoration Begins, Local Workers Hired. Claire busied herself with the display, avoiding Jack's thoughtful gaze. Tom Weber from the neighboring farm approached, worry lines deep in his weathered face. "Jack, got a minute? Bank's making noise about my loan terms again." Before Jack could respond, Claire spoke up. "Have you considered cooperative purchasing?" Both men turned to her. She continued, careful to keep her tone casual. "If several farms bought supplies together, you'd qualify for bulk discounts. Could reduce operating costs by 20%, maybe more." "Sounds complicated," Tom said, but his eyes held interest. "Not really. Just need one person to coordinate orders, handle the paperwork. Claire caught herself, reining in her executive instincts. I mean, I've heard it works in other farming communities. By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered at their booth, not just to buy vegetables, but to listen to Claire. She found herself drawing on years of business experience, translating corporate strategies into practical solutions for small farms. Group insurance plans, shared equipment programs, direct-to-restaurant contracts. "Where'd you learn all this?" Mrs. Peterson asked, clutching her shopping bag. "Oh, I read a lot," Claire said lamely. Jack's eyes tracked her movements, seeing too much. The market's energy shifted as Sarah arrived, tablet in hand. She paused at the sight of the crowd around their booth, her expression sharpening, as she heard Claire explaining modern distribution networks to a group of elderly farmers. "Quite the business consultant you've found, Dad," Sarah said quietly. "Just sharing ideas," Claire replied, but her voice lacked conviction. A commotion at the market entrance drew their attention. A sleek SUV had parked, and men in expensive casual wear emerged, cameras ready. "Real estate developers," Sarah muttered. "They've been photographing everything, claiming they're documenting local culture." Claire recognized the tactics. She'd used similar methods in her early career. The thought made her stomach turn. "They're coming this way," Jack said, his hand finding the watch in his pocket, a gesture Claire had learned meant he was troubled. Without thinking, Claire stepped forward, positioning herself between the developers and the booth. As they raised their cameras, she turned slightly, letting her face fall into familiar angles. Later, when they reviewed their photos, they'd find a ghostly resemblance to Claire Montgomery in their shots of local color. That should send an interesting message back to their corporate offices. "Beautiful produce," one developer said, reaching for a tomato. "Really captures the authenticity we're looking for." "Not for sale," Jack said firmly. The developer blinked. "I'm sorry. The tomato, the photo op, the authentic local color, none of it's for sale." Jack's voice carried across the market square. Other farmers straightened, moving to stand with him. Claire watched the corporate masks slip slightly. She'd fired people who'd failed lesser challenges. But here, surrounded by proud farmers and honest dirt, the developers' practiced smiles held no power. "Perhaps another time," the lead developer said smoothly, retreating. As they drove away, Claire felt Jack's hand brush against hers. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For standing with us, even though you're—" He paused, just passing through. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Claire looked at their booth, the vegetables they'd harvested together that morning, the recipes they'd swapped with customers, the community that had welcomed her without questioning who she was or what she owned. The market hummed around them, alive with conversation and connection. At the neighboring booth, Tom Weber was already organizing a meeting about cooperative purchasing. Sarah stood nearby, sharp eyes missing nothing. Claire's phone lay silent in her pocket, but she could feel its weight, the pull of her other life, of board meetings and merger deadlines and arranged marriages to corporate allies. Here, in the morning sun, that world felt like the illusion. "Jack, she started, but the market bell rang, announcing the start of the afternoon session. He turned to help a customer, the moment slipping away like sand through her fingers. The newspaper flickered in the breeze, its headline about the Miller farm, a reminder of choices made and choices yet to come. Claire straightened a display of carrots, their orange tops reaching toward the sun like prayers. Sarah found the business card while doing laundry. It had fallen from Claire's jeans pocket, somehow surviving the wash cycle, cream-colored cardstock with raised silver lettering that caught the afternoon light. Claire Montgomery, CEO, Montgomery Technologies. Her hands shook as she opened her laptop, typing the name into a search engine. The results loaded instantly. Photos of Claire in executive suits, headlines about tech innovations and corporate acquisitions, and most damning of all recent articles about Montgomery Tech's aggressive expansion into agricultural technology. The screen door creaked as Jack came in from the fields. "Sarah, you here?" She quickly minimized the browser window. "In the laundry room, Dad." Jack appeared in the doorway, his face brightening. "Claire's showing me a new irrigation technique. Out in the south field. You should come see." "We need to talk." Sarah held up the business card. "About who your guest really is." The change in Jack's expression was subtle, a tightening around the eyes, a slight straightening of his shoulders. He took the card, running a thumb over the embossed letters. "Where did you find this?" "Her pocket." "Dad, she's not just some lost traveler. She's the CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the world." Sarah opened her laptop again, showing him the search results. "The same company that's been buying up agricultural land all across the state." Jack sat heavily on the washing machine, the business card small in his work-roughened hands. "Tell me what you found." Sarah pulled up document after document. Unter's corporate filings, news reports, acquisition records. Montgomery Tech has been systematically purchasing water rights and farmland through shell companies. They're building some kind of agricultural technology empire. She paused on a photo of Claire accepting a business award. "And their CEO just happens to show up at our farm." The sound of footsteps on the porch made them both turn. Through the window, they could see Claire approaching, her face flushed from working in the fields, looking nothing like her corporate photos. "Dad," Sarah said softly, "she's been lying to you. To all of us." Jack stared at the business card for a long moment, then slipped it into his pocket next to his grandfather's watch. "Let me handle this." "But, Sarah," his voice was gentle but firm, "some conversations need to happen face to face." The screen door opened and Claire called out, "Jack, you won't believe how well that new watering system is working. The soil, moisture readings are—" She stopped at the sight of them, picking up the tension in the room. "Everything okay?" Jack turned and Claire's smile faded at his expression. Sarah watched the subtle shift in the other woman's posture, from relaxed to alert, from farm helper to CEO. "I need to check something in town," Sarah said, gathering her laptop. At the door she paused. "Just remember what I said about betrayal, Dad." Alone in the room, Jack and Claire stood in heavy silence. Outside, a tractor rumbled past. Inside, the washing machine's final spin cycle ticked like a countdown. "Jack," Claire started, but he held up a hand. "Before you say anything." He pulled out the business card, now slightly damp from the wash. "Want to tell me about this?" Claire's face went pale. She reached for the card, then let her hand fall. "I can explain." "Can you?" "Because I'm having trouble understanding how the CEO of Montgomery Technologies ends up fixing tractors and discussing crop rotation on my farm." His voice was calm, controlled, but Claire could hear the hurt beneath it. "Everything I told you about wanting something real, about needing to escape, that was all true. Was it? Or was this all research for your next acquisition?" He gestured to the laptop Sarah had left open, headlines about Montgomery Tech's agricultural division clearly visible. "Were we just another property to add to your portfolio?" "No." The force of Claire's denial surprised them both. "Jack, please. Yes, I lied about who I was, but not about who I am. Not about how I feel about this place, about—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Jack's hand went to his pocket, touching his grandfather's watch, a gesture she'd come to read as him seeking guidance from the past. "The Miller farm," he said quietly. "That was you?" Claire nodded, unable to speak. "And the cooperative purchasing group? The new irrigation systems? All part of some corporate strategy?" "They were me trying to help without revealing who I was, trying to protect this place, these people." "These people?" Jack's voice hardened. "We're not a charity case, Claire. We're not some project for a bored billionaire to fix." The washing machine buzzed, making them both jump. Claire reached out, but Jack stepped back. "I need time," he said, "to think." He walked out, leaving Claire alone in the laundry room. Through the window, she watched him cross the yard to the barn, his steps heavy. The business card lay on. The washing machine like evidence at a crime scene. Her two worlds finally colliding in cream-colored cardstock and silver letters. The farm deed lay spread across Jack's desk, its edges worn from generations of careful handling. Claire stood in the office doorway, watching him trace the property lines with a calloused finger. 3 days had passed since the business card. Revelation, 3 days of careful distance and weighted silence. "The bank called again," he said without looking up. "They're moving up the review timeline." Claire stepped into the room, maintaining a careful distance. "How long?" "2 weeks." His finger stopped at the creek boundary. "Unless we can show significant capital improvement or a solid modernization plan." The solution burned in Claire's throat. She could solve this with one phone call, one wire transfer. Instead, she said, "The cooperative purchasing group is already showing results, and the Miller Farm restoration is raising property values." Sarah did some more digging. Jack finally looked up, found out who's really behind the Miller purchase. Claire's heart stopped. "Jack, were you ever going to tell me? Or just keep orchestrating things from the shadows?" "I wanted to tell you. Every day I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of this. Of losing." She gestured helplessly at the space between them. Whatever this was becoming. Jack stood, his grandfather's watch ticking steadily in his pocket. "You know what's ironic? I've spent weeks trying to make you understand the value of history, of roots. But you understood all along, didn't you? Running an empire that your family built, that's different," Claire said quickly. "My family's legacy is spreadsheets and stock options. This," she touched the deed gently, "this is real. It's all real, Claire. The responsibility, the weight of generations, the need to preserve something meaningful." His voice softened. "Why couldn't you trust me with the truth?" Before she could answer, Sarah burst in, waving her tablet. "Dad, you need to see this. Montgomery Tech just announced a major agricultural technology initiative. They're calling it the Future of Farming program." Claire closed her eyes. The initiative she'd been working on for months, designed to help small farms modernize while maintaining their independence. The project she'd poured her heart into, inspired by Paradise Creek Farm. Full integration of smart technology, automated systems, data-driven decisions, Sarah read. All backed by Montgomery Tech's resources. She looked at Claire. "Sound familiar?" Jack picked up the deed, holding it like something precious. "Is this what you saw when you looked at my farm? A test case for your corporate initiative?" "No!" Claire stepped forward. "The initiative was inspired by you, by this place. Everything I learned here, about balance, about preservation, about real value, I tried to build it into the program, while lying to us every day. Because I fell in love," the words echoed in the small office, "with the farm, with this life, with—" She stopped, but it was too late. The deed crinkled slightly in Jack's grip. Outside, the afternoon sun caught the weathered barn walls, turning them gold. Everything Claire had tried to protect, everything she'd grown to love, balanced on this moment. "There's something else," Sarah said quietly. "The bank reviewing our loan. Montgomery Tech just bought a controlling interest in their agricultural division." Jack's head snapped up. "What? I didn't know," Claire said quickly. "I've been deliberately staying out of company operations while I was here. I swear, Jack, I didn't know." He carefully laid the deed back on the desk. "It doesn't matter, don't you see? Everything's tangled up now. The bank, the Miller Farm, the cooperative group. Every bit of hope we've had lately has your fingerprints on it. Let me fix this, please. No schemes, no shadows, just let me help openly." "Help?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "You mean buy us? Add us to your corporate portfolio?" "Sarah," Jack warned, but his daughter ploughed on. "What happens to all those farmers who joined the cooperative when they find out it was all a billionaire's experiment? What happens to Dad's reputation in the valley?" Claire felt each question like a physical blow. The watch ticked in Jack's pocket, counting down moments of a dream she'd let herself believe in. "I should go," she said softly. Neither Jack nor Sarah moved as she walked to the door. At the threshold, she turned back. For what it's worth, everything that matters was real. She left them standing over the deed, father and daughter, past and future, while her own two worlds collapsed into ruins around her. The magazine appeared in every store in town, Business Innovation Quarterly, with Claire Montgomery's face on the cover. She stood against the sleek glass backdrop of Montgomery Tech headquarters, power suit perfect, smile calculated. The headline, Read Agriculture's Tech Revolution, How Claire Montgomery is Transforming America's Farmland. Tom Weber slapped the magazine down on Jack's produce stand at the farmer's market. This who we've been taking advice from? The woman trying to buy up half the state? The market had fallen silent, all eyes moving between the magazine and Jack. He stood motionless, one hand on his grandfather's watch, while Sarah tried to manage the growing crowd. Look at the date, Mrs. Peterson said, adjusting her glasses. Article was written months ago. She's been planning this all along. Claire watched from her car across the square, her heart breaking as she saw Jack's shoulders stiffen under the onslaught. She'd planned to leave town quietly, but now, taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car. The crowd noticed her immediately, whispers spreading like wind through wheat. She'd dressed in her familiar farm clothes, worn jeans, work boots, but everyone now saw the CEO from the magazine cover. Jack, she said softly, reaching the stand. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to happen this way. Meant for what? To happen, Tom demanded. For us to be your rural case study? No. Claire turned to face the gathered farmers. For you to be proof. Proof of what? Sarah's voice cut through the murmurs. That there's a middle way. Claire gestured to the magazine. Yes, that article is about transforming agriculture, but not by destroying it, by preserving what matters while adapting to survive. She picked up the magazine, flipping to the article's core spread. Look at the pilot program they're describing. It's based on everything I learned here. Small farm autonomy, cooperative resource management, technology serving tradition, not replacing it. Pretty words, someone called out, from someone who lied to us for weeks. You're right, Claire's voice cracked. I lied about who I was. I came here running from my life, from an arranged merger marriage, from board pressures. I thought I was just hiding. She looked at Jack. I didn't expect to find something real, something worth fighting for. Jack finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying across the square. And now? What are you fighting for, Claire? Your company's vision? Your legacy? For this. She spread her arms, encompassing the market, the community, the way of life she'd grown to love, for proving that progress doesn't have to mean destruction, that small farms can thrive without selling their souls. By selling to you instead? Sarah stepped forward, tablet in hand. Your company now controls the bank that holds loans on half the farms in this valley. Gasps and angry mutters swept through the crowd. Claire raised her hands. A move made. Without my knowledge or approval, I've spent the last 2 days trying to reverse it. Why should we believe you? Tom asked, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his anger. Claire pulled out her phone, not the hidden one, but her corporate device. Because I just called an emergency board meeting. In 1 hour, I'm announcing that Montgomery Tech is transferring all agricultural loan holdings to a community trust. Local control, favorable terms, with cooperative members holding majority voting rights. The crowd stirred. Sarah grabbed the phone, scanning the document Claire had pulled up. She's telling the truth. These are real corporate filings. And the Miller Farm restoration, Jack asked quietly, will continue exactly as planned. Local workers, local management, just better funded. Claire stepped closer to him. Everything I did, every deception was wrong, but everything I learned, everything I felt, she touched. The worn wood of the produce stand. That was all true. Jack's hand moved from his watch to the magazine cover, tracing the image of corporate Claire. I don't even know which version of you is real anymore. They both are, she said softly. The CEO who wants to help farms survive, and the woman who fell in love with a farmer, who taught her what's really worth preserving. The market had gone silent again, watching this private moment play out publicly. In the distance, the town hall clock began to strike noon. Each chime felt like a heartbeat marking time between one life and another. "The board meeting starts soon," Claire said. "I have to go." She looked around at the community she'd come to love. "Whatever you decide about the program, about me, know that Paradise Creek Farm changed everything. You changed everything." She turned to leave, each step feeling like lead. Behind her, she heard the rustle of magazine pages, the murmur of conversation resuming, the slow return to normal life. But normal had changed, for all of them. The glossy magazine lay open on Jack's stand, two versions of Claire Montgomery staring at each other across an unbridgeable divide. Or perhaps, though, she hardly dared hope, across a gap waiting to be filled with understanding, forgiveness, and a new kind of truth. Claire's handwritten business plan lay open on the community center table, her elegant script a stark contrast to the building's weathered wood walls. Around her, the faces of Paradise Creek's farmers reflected a mix of skepticism and reluctant interest. "A farming technology incubator," she explained, pointing to her diagrams. Paradise Creek Farm would be the development hub, testing new agricultural technologies in real-world conditions, but with a crucial difference. She met Jack's eyes across the room. "The farmers control the process." Sarah leaned forward, studying. "The financial projections. These numbers are conservative," Claire finished, "based on current market valuations and existing technology partnerships. The real potential is higher." "And what do you get out of it?" Tom Weber asked, arms crossed. Claire took a deep breath. "Field testing for Montgomery Tech's agricultural division. Real feedback from real farmers, but," she emphasized the next part, "no ownership, no control, just a partnership, with all patents and innovations jointly held by the cooperative." Jack spoke for the first time since the meeting began. "Why Paradise Creek?" The question held layers of meaning. Why this farm, this place, this person? Claire touched the paper gently. "Because this farm taught me what I'd forgotten. That innovation isn't just about efficiency. It's about preserving what matters, while building something new." She looked around the room. "Every farmer here knows Jack Harrison, knows he'd never compromise what matters. That's exactly why Paradise Creek should lead this." Mrs. Peterson, who'd been quietly knitting in the corner, set down her needles. "Girl's got a point. If Jack's involved, it'll be done right." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Claire pulled out another document, a draft contract she'd spent all night preparing. "Everything's here. Funding commitments, technology, sharing, local control provisions." She pushed it towards Sarah. "Have your lawyers review it. Every word is negotiable." Sarah's eyes widened as she read. This could actually work." "Of course it could work," Mrs. Peterson said tartly. "Girl spent weeks learning every inch of our farms, our problems. Didn't have to do that for some corporate takeover." Claire felt tears threatening. "I didn't expect to fall in love with this place, these people, this life." Her voice dropped. "One person in particular." The room grew quiet. Jack stood, walking to the table. His grandfather's watch caught the afternoon light as he picked up the business plan, studying Claire's careful drawings of his farm, reimagined as a bridge between past and future. "You did all this by hand," he said softly, "not on a computer." "Some things need the human touch." Claire's voice wavered, like understanding what a place really means to people. Outside, a tractor rumbled past, one of the new ones Claire's cooperative purchasing plan had helped arrange. Inside, the future of Paradise Creek hung in the balance. Tom Weber cleared his throat. "I say we put it to a vote. All in favor of giving Claire's crazy idea a shot?" Hands rose around the room, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. Sarah's went up, then Mrs. Peterson's. Finally, only Jack remained. He looked at Claire, really looked at her, seeing both the CEO and the woman who'd helped him fix tractors and cook his mother's recipes. His hand moved to his pocket, touching the watch that had marked time through 3 generations of Harrison dreams. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the best way to honor the past is to build a better future." His hand rose. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The business plan sat between them, covered in soil from farmers' hands. No longer just her vision, but the beginning of something shared. The partnership agreement sat unsigned on Jack's kitchen table, its legal language a stark contrast to the familiar surroundings. Claire had deliberately chosen this setting, not a corporate boardroom or lawyer's office, but the heart of paradise. Creek Farm, where they'd first begun to know each other. It's more than just a business arrangement, she explained, touching the document's embossed letterhead. It's a framework for the future. Your future. Jack stood by the window watching. The sun set behind his grandfather's barn. You make it sound simple. Nothing about this is simple, Claire smiled sadly. A tech CEO falling for a farmer, trying to bridge two different worlds. It's probably the least simple thing I've ever done. He turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. Why did you really come here, Claire? The whole truth this time. She owed him that much. I was supposed to marry Charles Wilson of Agritech Solutions. A merger of companies through marriage, very old school. The board thought it was perfect. She laughed softly. I ran away the day before our first arranged meeting. To hear? Why? Random chance. Or fate. She gestured around the kitchen. I needed somewhere real. Somewhere people valued things that couldn't be bought or sold. I never expected to actually find it. To find you. The words hung between them. Jack moved to the table, picking up the agreement. This section here, about maintaining traditional farming practices alongside innovation. You added that after that first day watching me work, didn't you? Claire nodded, surprised. How did you know? Because that's when you first saw what this place really means. Not just the land or the business, but the connection to something bigger. He tapped the paper. It's in every word you wrote. Outside, the evening light painted the kitchen in shades of gold and amber. The same light that had welcomed Claire. On her first day, that had illuminated countless moments of growing trust and understanding. I've had lawyers review everything, Jack said quietly. Sarah too. They say it's the most farmer-friendly agreement they've ever seen. Actually had to convince our side not to push for more protections, because I wanted it that way. This isn't about Montgomery Tech acquiring assets. It's about preserving something, precious, while helping it grow. Jack's hand went to his pocket, pulling out his grandfather's watch. Beside it, he placed Claire's business card, the one that had revealed her identity. Two different worlds, he mused. They don't have to be. Claire stepped closer. Your grandfather built this farm by embracing the future while honoring the past. The watch still keeps perfect time, doesn't it, even after all these years? Because it was built to last, built true, like this could be. Claire touched the agreement. If you're willing to trust again. Jack studied her face, not the CEO. From the magazine cover, but the woman who'd learned to love his land, his life, his world, who'd tried, despite her deceptions, to protect what mattered most. Sarah says you turned down the merger with Agritech, that your board is furious. They'll get over it. This plan is better, for everyone. She smiled wryly, though I doubt they expected their CEO to find business inspiration and personal happiness in a Montana farm valley. Happiness. Jack's voice was soft. The most real happiness I've ever known. He picked up the pen, weighing it in his calloused hand. If we do this, it has to be real. No more shadows, no more schemes. Just truth, Claire promised, and hard work, and learning to balance two worlds together. Jack looked at the watch one last time, then set it beside the agreement. Past and future, side by side. With deliberate care he began to sign. Claire held her breath, watching his signature take shape. Not just on a business document, but on a bridge between their worlds, a foundation for something new and true and lasting. When he finished, Jack held out the pen. Your turn, Ms. Montgomery. Claire, she corrected, taking the pen. Just Claire. Her signature flowed across the page. Corporate authority and personal promise combining into something unique. Like Paradise Creek Farm itself, rooted in tradition, reaching toward tomorrow. As the last light faded outside, they sat in comfortable silence, the signed agreement between them. No more running, no more hiding, just the challenge of building something. Real together, one careful step at a time. A simple silver ring lay in Jack's palm. His grandmother's, Sarah had told Claire. Not an extravagant CEO's diamond, but a band worn smooth by decades of farm work and loving hands. They stood in the south field where they'd first worked together, the morning sun painting everything in shades of promise. "I'm not asking yet," Jack said quietly, "but I wanted you to see it, to understand what it means." Claire touched the ring gently. "Tell me." "My grandmother wore this ring for 52 years. Never took it off, not even during harvest. Said the dirt under it just proved it was real." He smiled at the memory. "Dad said she called it her true ring because it showed the truth of her life, her love, her choices." Behind them, the farmhouse stood quiet in the early light. Through the window, Claire could see her laptop open on the kitchen table, dozens of unread emails from the board demanding attention. Her two worlds, still separate but slowly drawing closer. "The board wants me back in Seattle," she said, "permanently. They say a CEO can't run a tech company from a farm valley." "What do you say?" Claire looked out over the fields they'd worked together, the land that had taught her what really mattered. "I say they don't understand what I learned here. That sometimes the best view of the future comes from standing in a field, feeling soil between your fingers." She pulled out her phone, not hidden anymore, but not controlling her either. "I sent them my conditions this morning. I'll split my time between here and Seattle, major meetings, quarterly reviews, important decisions. I'll be there, but this—" She gestured to the farm, to Jack, to the life they were building. "This is home. They might not agree. Then they can find another CEO." Claire's voice was firm. "I spent my whole life thinking power meant corner offices and billion-dollar deals. But real power," she touched a sprouting cornstalk, "it's in knowing what you value and choosing it every day." Jack studied her face. "No regrets about giving up that other life?" "I'm not giving it up. I'm making it mean something more." She stepped closer to him. "Montgomery Tech can help preserve family farms across the country, but I can't do that from a boardroom. I need to be here, learning, understanding, keeping it real." The ring caught the sunlight as Jack turned it in his hand. "Sarah thinks I'm crazy, falling for a CEO who could buy the whole valley. What do you think?" "I think I'm falling for a woman who learned to fix tractors, who cooks my mother's recipes, who sees this land the way I do." He paused. "Who just happens to run a tech empire on the side." Claire laughed, the sound carrying across the morning quiet field. In the distance, the first workers were arriving at the Miller Farm restoration project. Soon, the valley would be alive with activity. Traditional farming alongside careful innovation, finding a balance that preserved what mattered. "When I first came here," Claire said softly, "I was running away from expectations, from a life that felt empty, from a marriage arranged for stock prices." She met Jack's eyes. "I never expected to run into something real. Real comes with complications. I'm ready for them." She touched the ring in his palm. "All of them, whenever you're ready to ask." Jack closed his hand around the ring, then reached out and took hers. They stood together in the field where their story had begun, the morning sun warming their shoulders. Behind them, Claire's phone buzzed with another board message. Before them stretched acres of possibility. "Welcome home, Claire Montgomery," Jack said softly. She squeezed his hand, feeling the strength built from generations of working this land. "Actually, I was thinking, Claire Montgomery Harrison has a nice ring to it when you're ready to ask." The sun climbed higher, promising another day of work, challenges and love built on truth. In Jack's pocket, his grandfather's watch ticked steadily, marking time not just for two people, but for two worlds learning to become one. The new sign at the entrance to Paradise Creek Farm caught the morning light. Paradise Creek Farm and Agricultural Center, Eston 1924, innovation rooted in tradition. 1 year had transformed the property, but not in the ways many had feared. The historic red barn still stood proud, though now it housed both traditional equipment and a state-of-the-art soil testing laboratory. Solar panels gleamed above the south field's crops, while the north pasture remained unchanged, cattle grazing as they had for generations. Every change had been made with careful consideration, preserving the soul of the place while securing its future. Claire adjusted her simple white dress as she stood before the farmhouse mirror. No designer wedding gown or elaborate ceremony, just family, friends, and the community that had become her home. Sarah appeared in the doorway holding a small box. "Dad wanted you to have this before the ceremony." She handed Claire the box. Their relationship, now warm, with hard-won understanding. Inside lay Jack's grandfather's watch, polished but still bearing the marks of its history. A note in Jack's handwriting read, "Time for new traditions." Outside, guests gathered in the apple orchard, where they'd set up simple wooden chairs. Tom Weber stood chatting with Montgomery Tech's head of agricultural research, their animated discussion about crop yields carrying across the lawn. Mrs. Peterson supervised the placement of her famous pies on the reception table, while farm workers and tech developers mingled easily, each learning from the other. "Ready?" Sarah asked, offering Claire her bouquet, wildflowers picked from the meadow that morning. Claire fastened the watch around her wrist, its weight familiar and right. More than ready. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. Jack waited beneath an arch of twisted grapevines, wearing his best shirt and the smile that had first made Claire's heart skip. When she reached him, he took her hands, calloused fingers meeting skin that now bore its own marks of farm work. "The ring?" the minister asked. Jack pulled out his grandmother's band, now accompanied by a simple engagement ring Claire had chosen. Elegant but practical enough for farm work. As he slipped them on her finger, he whispered, "Still sure about this life?" Claire's answer was interrupted by the distant rumble of the afternoon train, a sound that had once represented escape, but now meant connection. Twice a week, that train brought students, researchers, and farmers to Paradise Creek's new agricultural education center, all eager to learn about balancing tradition with innovation. "More sure than I've ever been," she whispered back. The reception sprawled across the farmyard in typical Paradise Creek style, picnic tables laden with potluck dishes, fairy lights strung between trees, and Mrs. Peterson's pies competing with a wedding cake made from Jack's mother's recipe. Claire had insisted on keeping it intimate and real, just like the life they'd built. As evening approached, Claire found a quiet moment to check her phone. Now, a tool rather than a tether. The Montgomery Tech Board's congratulations sat alongside. Messages from farmers across the valley. Her two worlds, finally in harmony. Jack found her by the barn, where they'd first worked together. "Having CEO regrets," he teased, seeing the phone. "Actually," she smiled, showing him the screen, "I was looking at the latest results from the soil monitoring system. The Heritage Wheat program is exceeding expectations." He wrapped his arms around her, both of them gazing out over their land. The setting sun painted the solar panels gold above flourishing crops, while the old barn stood steady behind them. In the distance, the Miller farm's restored buildings glowed warm and welcoming. "You know what my grandfather used to say?" Jack's voice was soft near her ear. "That the best farmers don't just grow crops, they grow tomorrow." Claire touched, the watch on her wrist, then the rings on her finger. He was right. But sometimes tomorrow needs a little help from today. They stood together as darkness fell and the fairy lights twinkled to life. From the party came the sounds of laughter, of community, of future and past celebrating together. Claire Montgomery Harrison, CEO and farmer's wife, felt the rightness of it all settle into her bones. "Time to rejoin our guests?" Jack asked. Claire took one last look at their transformed farm, at the life they'd built from two separate worlds. "Yes," she said, "time for another perfect Paradise Creek evening." Hand in hand, they walked back toward the lights and laughter, while overhead stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, eternal witnesses to old dreams and new beginnings, to love that bridged worlds, and to the endless possibility of tomorrow.